In today's evolving global landscape, West Asia stands at the forefront of impact investing, uniquely positioned to address pressing challenges and emerging as a powerhouse of innovative approaches. In this episode of the Impact Investing Musings, we will delve into the unique landscape of impact investing in West Asia, highlighting the potential of transformative social and environmental impact. Joining us today are two distinguished guests. Our first guest is Beau Seil, the founder and managing partner of Fractal, a Dubai-based consulting and executive coaching firm focused on tech founders and VC fund managers. Prior to launching Fractal, Beau was a founding partner at Patama Capital, the leading impact-driven VC firm in Southeast Asia. And our next guest is Sonia Weymuller, who is the co-founder and general partner at VentureSouq, a MENA-based venture capital firm with a global portfolio where she leads the firm's climate tech investment practice. Hi, Beau. Hi, Sonia. Thank you both for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Starting with you, Beau, you've recently made the move to Dubai, and I'm curious to know how your experience has been so far.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's been an amazing ride. You're right. I did move to the UAE recently, and I've been so impressed, so deeply impressed by the energy and vision in the region. For me, it feels very similar to the run-up that I saw in the tech entrepreneurship and the impact investing ecosystem in Southeast Asia in the second half of the 2010s. At that time, there were just founders building really interesting solutions. And here in the UAE, what I'm seeing across the UAE and the GCC and the entire region is a lot of founders building really cool stuff related to inclusive finance, climate tech and energy, innovation across agriculture, healthcare, you name it. And beyond that, this is without question the most diverse place I've ever lived. It's a region that I'm obsessed learning about and obsessed understanding on so many different levels. It's a crossroads of the world, essentially. And I feel more connected to people from all across the world here in the UAE than at any other time in my life. It definitely helps that the large institutional investors are investing in companies, funds, and other projects across the world. And fund managers are coming here to seek investment capital. But for me, the flow of people and people setting up here, the most exciting thing is how the UAE has brought together energetic folks from across the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, Europe, and every other corner of the globe. And they've really come here to build new things in almost every sector. And beyond that, government leaders are also constantly developing and refining their long-term vision. And they continue to be really focused on building a more flexible regulatory environment and business environment to help new solutions thrive. I mean, essentially, they're strivers, and they know that the things that can't be done in the same way they were done in the past to address the challenges and opportunities that we as humanity are going to face over the coming decades. And they really want to be a part of that. They know this is their chance with their vision and also the resources they have to really have a dent in the world. And right now I'm working on some really interesting projects here in the UAE. And through that work, I get to interact with deeply resourceful entrepreneurs and investors who are taking an intelligent approach to using capital and technology to address those opportunities and challenges. I think what I would say is I feel really lucky and having a chance to help out and share insights from what I learned from working to help develop the early stage impact ecosystem in South and Southeast Asia for over a decade, from the early 2010s. And, I think that one of the things that keeps me going is that people really are starting to think deeply about how they invest their capital in a more purposeful way here. And things are really starting to get rolling. It's definitely a builder's mentality across every sector in the region. And, my wife, Sonia, she's been absolutely instrumental in helping develop the ecosystem here in the UAE over the last decade through her work at VentureSouq. And, I kind of get to piggyback on that. And it's really cool to be here with her and work together in our own ways to help founders and investors, and then business and government leaders really push things forward as they're developing a whole new set of approaches to address the challenges that are here in the region.
Thank you for sharing that, Beau. Now, moving to Sonia, you've launched one of the first VC funds in the Middle East, which is quite a pioneering achievement. So, could you share a bit more about the work you're doing at VentureSouq? And given the uniqueness of this region, what inspired you to dive into impact investing here? And how did you go about determining the fund's investment focus and thesis?
Sure. So we've been around for a while, since 2013, so 11 years ago now. And by we, we're four founding partners. Two of us went to university together. The other two we met here in Dubai, and we started angel investing together. And the ecosystem back then here in the MENA region was very, very different to what it is today. Very nascent at the time. But what we found with that was that there was an interest amongst young professionals like ourselves to invest in early stage tech. And it wasn't impact specific, but in general, early stage tech. And so we started hosting informal meetups. There was no business model, there's no membership fee. It was literally like, if you're interested in learning, come meet like-minded folks, hear interesting journeys from entrepreneurs, and then invest if you want to invest directly with the entrepreneur. And then basically we were onto something. There was definitely a gap in the market. Our meetups, what we called our investor roundups, started getting larger and larger in size. And we ended up building the largest angel syndicate for the GCC and deployed about $30 million at the time. And so then it kind of made sense as we grew up with the ecosystem to pivot into building a VC platform. By then, we had already made about 100 investments from around the world. So we started identifying specific trends into sectors that we felt that were not being addressed necessarily in this region, where there was a kind of an opportunity for capital injection and for development. And so that's what fed into us making a conscious decision actually to launch thematic funds. So we launched the first sector-focused fund, which focused on fintech in 2020. That's backed by all the sovereign wealth funds in the region. In parallel, I had done previously a stint with Acumen Fund back in 2016, 2017. And Jacqueline kind of planted the seed in my head of what impact investing could look like. I mean, Acumen is considered one of the pioneers in the space, right? And so I thought that was very interesting. I wasn't quite sure that the region was quite ready for that, given that it was so nascent when it came to the VC. So adding an impact lens to that, how would that be received in the region? Is that too complicated? So I kind of parked the idea and revisited the idea in 2019, and that led to us launching the first impact vehicle in 2020 called the Conscious Collective. That had a global mandate. It focused mainly on climate and financial inclusion, and we ended up deploying from Indonesia all the way to Chile. And this was us kind of testing the market out. Do people understand you can invest in mission-driven founders and get financial returns at the same time and not concessionary ones, especially if you're investing in scalable tech-enabled ventures from around the world. Proud to say that vehicle is performing very well. We've already had a couple of exits. We already have a unicorn in the portfolio. So this was great for us to provide and to build up case studies for what we're now working on, which is our climate thesis. And so we're in the midst of launching the first early stage climate-focused fund out of the region, with a focus on the global south. Why the global south? And I define the global south, by the way, by MENA, Africa, and Asia, essentially. So emerging markets, because we started seeing, we've already made about 20 investments in the climate space historically. And what we saw is that there are a lot of corridors. There's this new digital kind of green route, if you will, or green road that's being built out, where we're seeing some of our portfolio founders, either from the West wanting to get into emerging markets, or sitting in emerging markets wanting to move west, not west towards the west-west necessarily, but maybe from India to MENA, for example, which we've seen with one of our portfolio companies, or from Africa into Asia, or vice versa. And so we felt like there was an opportunity to delve deeper into that thesis. What does a climate thesis with a emerging market lens look like, in order to support and nurture the next generation of climate founders coming out of these markets?
That's amazing. I think just to follow up on that, for both of you, what strategies have you kind of found effective in attracting LPs, and how do you build that relationship with these potential investors? Are there any unique challenges that you've noticed in fundraising for impact-focused VCs in West Asia?
I can jump in with kind of the MENA perspective. It was difficult. I think there's still very much a two-pocket thinking driven mindset here where you have one pocket for philanthropy and one pocket for for-profit. And so what we noticed when we were building out the Conscious Collective thesis back in 2020 is that we needed to educate the market. We need to educate the LP market specifically. And so what did we do? We launched a fellowship program. So we partnered with New York University in Abu Dhabi, their entrepreneurship arm called Start AD, who we have a very close relationship with. And we basically launched the first pan-regional conscious investor fellowship. Be mindful of the fact that I'm not using the word impact, and that was a very conscious decision for us to not use the word impact even in the title of the fellowship, because we didn't want to already trigger certain connotations that word comes with. And so we went with Conscious Capital, Conscious Investor Fellowship, and basically we select 25 fellows from across the GCC. They're all senior level individuals who are capital allocators, either family offices, corporates, sovereign wealth funds, other VCs want to explore kind of this space, and we run them through an 8-week program. And Beau actually led one of the modules in the first iteration. And the purpose of that is to kind of create a community of like-minded individuals who understand that you can give your money more purpose and more impact and more power ultimately, but also get a financial return at the same time. And to create that shift in mindset, that slight shift in mindset, so that by the end of the program, they're like, okay, wow, like I actually studied some really interesting businesses and case studies. These are not social enterprises. These are fully tech-enabled, scalable businesses that have very sound business models. This is a space that is actually investable. And so it was just that little shift. It's an 8-week program, right? It's 2 hours a week. There's only so much you can do. But if you can get people out of that headspace, that if you're investing in the space that, you're basically giving your money away, we want to move away from that in the region. And so that's what we've been doing. In addition to that, I would say through the due diligence process, oftentimes the right questions are not necessarily being asked. With regards to what impact frameworks and measurement tools are you using, how do you integrate and embed ESG into your due diligence process, etc. And so there's another level of kind of soft education that happens when they look at the way that kind of we approach both these themes of impact and ESG, which are separate. Actually, there's also conflation between these two a lot in this region, where people think that they're kind of the same. So again, kind of explaining that these are the ways that we use ESG tools and impact tools for monitoring and for investing. And then that enables them to start thinking about, okay, maybe this is something we should start asking all our fund managers to start doing. And so I think it's subtle the way we're doing it, but I think it's happening a lot more. I think in markets like Saudi, you're hearing the word ESG a lot more. Since 2021, all publicly listed companies in Saudi have to report on their ESG KPIs and are rated accordingly. So we're definitely kind of seeing a lot more interest. In Abu Dhabi, there's ESG task forces being put in place to understand how corporates and kind of private sector players will start integrating ESG into the way they see the world as well. So that's kind of the way that we've chosen to approach it.
That's very interesting, especially the point that you mentioned that they need to be able to identify what questions they need to ask, right? Yes. Otherwise, the point is missed. So, Beau, do you want to add anything on this along this question?
I'll try to add a little bit. It may not actually add to it because Sonia knows the region much better than I do. One of the things that I think's really exciting about what's going on now is that from the very top, across the most influential governments here in the region, people actually are trying to place money and move it in the right direction. And, they have the benefit of watching the rest of the world's markets actually be involved in impactful investment strategies for quite a long time. And there's always been a very family-oriented, almost like a strong take care of one's own here in the region. And so I think it's very natural for people to think about how do we do nation building? How do we create a better world for our populations? Obviously, there's challenges in implementing and executing and getting everybody moving in the right direction. So I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, but it's something where people have a long-term vision and they're trying to execute on it. If I compare that to let's see, it's 2024. So, over 15 years ago, when we first started trying to get to work and move capital towards impactful ventures in Southeast Asia. One, technology, the idea of being a technology entrepreneur in Southeast Asia was still quite new. So that was one thing. So there was just not as much of a pipeline at the time, even though there were great entrepreneurs raising capital, but it wasn't just a huge quantum that was going to, think that you could raise enormous funds around this. And I think that the world has all shifted, which is very exciting. There's founders doing everything you can think of in just about every sector, using technology to build new business models that are affecting societies, affecting the environment. And, I think that this region understands that. And, one of the things that was great about, my business partners are still running Patamar in Southeast Asia. And, my other partner, Shuyin, she set up the Beacon Fund, which drives debt, towards women-led companies in Southeast Asia. And, we were able to be a part of that from the very beginning. And what Sonia and the VentureSouq team and some others here in the region are doing is essentially laying the building blocks and the foundation about how it can be done in the right way. And I just find it's a very exciting time, motivated investors who are trying to figure it out, and they're trying to answer a lot of very important questions for themselves. And, as they continue to educate themselves and put money to work and just get going, they'll start to learn that it's actually much more real and much easier to understand. You just have to start doing it. And I think that that's kind of where we are in West Asia, as people have been in experimental mode. And, they've gone through things like the Conscious Investor Fellowship, which the VentureSouq team put together with some very key partners. And people are, you're starting to lay that foundation of people who can speak they speak in a very educated and experienced manner of having put capital to work already.
Can I just add something to this as well? I think the other key point is kind of the generational changes that are happening as well. I mean, we see it within our own team amongst the junior members of the team. They care a lot more, and they understand that one doesn't preclude the other, that you can invest in really good tech-enabled ventures, but also impactful ones at the same time. And really what we're looking for ultimately, whether it be for climate or for some of the future funds that we'll be doing, is really like for companies where the impact is embedded in the commercial DNA of the company, right? So as the commercial KPI scale, so does the impact and the reach that company has. And I think that what we're seeing with kind of the next gen, our legacy essentially, right? The next generation of investors is that they do care. And there's data points here that you can kind of dig out that shows that even at the family office level, with the next gen taking over and understanding that they need to diversify and they want to start capturing some of the impact that the companies or their businesses are having.
That's quite interesting. I think a follow-up on that would be when you're setting up a fund and there's a myth around that you can't have financial returns with measurable outcomes like you were mentioning. What strategies did you find effective when you were identifying portfolio companies to invest in, that to ensure that you're going to have that target market return that you're hoping to achieve?
So, I mean, on our side, it's pretty simple. Commercially, we have the same scorecard as the rest of the fund products that we have, for example, for fintech. So the commercial KPIs that we look for when you due diligence a company are actually the same. What we had for Conscious Collective, and which we also have for climate, is an additional scorecard on the impact side. And in order to make it to the next level of diligence, the company that we're diligencing has to basically pass both thresholds of both scorecards in order to make it to the next step of diligence. So if we feel like, okay, commercial KPIs are sound, impact not so much, we actually probably will not move further. So we're really kind of hyper filtered almost in the types of deals that we look at. So that would be my answer.
So what kind of a framework do you look at when you're measuring these impact? Because there's a problem of lack of standardization with respect to impact. How do you manage that expectation?
I think it's a work with the founder. So ultimately, like, we will set out certain impact KPIs that we look for, but also it's very sector specific. the type of impact that the company is going to have, depending on whether you're looking at an ag tech deal or a supply chain deal or a climate fintech deal or energy management deal, right? So they're all going to be different metrics that are going to be reported on and kind of monitored, right? But ultimately, a lot of the work that we do is actually sit down with the founder to actually agree on a set of impact metrics that both parties will continue to report on, and that's like obviously an ongoing conversation. I think it's important. What's been interesting for us to see is that we've invested in a spectrum of different types of founders within this space. So you have the highly sophisticated ones who will like hand over their theory of change and their impact metrics, etc., on one end, and then you have the other end where the entrepreneur will come to us and say, listen, like, I know that the impact that we're having is like embedded in what we're doing, right? I have no idea how to report on this or monitor this. So help us, basically. So then we work hand in hand with them to actually identify which direct impact and indirect impact KPIs are most important. And that will eventually evolve, of course, as the companies moves on in their journey as well. There's obviously a whole bunch of different toolboxes that you have out there, 5 dimensions of impact, Iris Plus, but then inevitably, as you said, there's no standardized way of seeing this. These tools kind of get you to a certain point, but then you layer on more as you dig deeper into the business of some, especially on the indirect impact metric side of what reach actually and kind of level of depth of impact the company can have as it moves on. So it's an ongoing journey. There's no standardization. I agree. We have certain toolboxes like obviously what Jin has put forward and the 5 dimensions of impact. There's all these different frameworks that are used. They're kind of, everyone kind of takes these frameworks and creates their little secret sauce, but then inevitably that there's that extra layer on top of that. And then on the ESG front, which is separate, we're part of a coalition called Venture ESG, which is a coalition of 200 GPs and LPs from around the world to basically come up with some level of standardization as much as we can for early stage. Much easier to apply ESG frameworks for later stage companies, much more difficult to do so for early stage. And so we've come up together with some level of kind of ESG framework that we all agreed on, and that's what we've integrated into our due diligence process as well.
Now, taking a step back, Sonia, you mentioned how emerging markets are increasingly looking into MENA and vice versa. Can you elaborate on this trend and what it means for the future of impact investing in these regions?
We have a couple of case studies of companies, like we have one company in the EV space, for example, from India. You would think India is a big enough market that the company doesn't need to think about scaling to the rest of the world, right? But they're very conscientiously looking to expand here to the GCC, right? And I think it's twofold. One is, in this case, the founder has spent quite a bit of time in the region. So they see the opportunity for what they're doing, that there's a gap in the market, that there's no other player in this market. It's kind of first mover advantage. And then second, capital, because companies always have to fundraise, right? And so building those relationships out early with potential capital providers from the MENA region is an important one as you raise, especially for larger rounds as well. I mean, listen, there's no doubt right now, and I think you saw it at the AVPN conference, that there's a lot of people coming to the region right now, whether you be a founder or a fund manager coming to fundraise. I think for the listeners who are thinking about either expanding their venture to the region or coming to fundraise from the region, just note that gone are the days where you come in for a 48-hour trip and you leave with a check in your hand. Like, those days don't exist anymore. And really what the region wants to see is the impact and the knowledge transfer that's going to happen into the region. They need to build out, as Beau earlier alluded to, their own ecosystems as well, right? So how are you going to help them do that? And it's not by just coming in on 2-day trips that you're going to be able to do that. They want to show that you have skin in the game and that you want to see, and then you're intentional about that you want to see the ecosystems here develop equally, right? So, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but I think it is important to note that, the dynamics have shifted from, a decade ago, and that, we're working with governments now that really have kind of transferred to a knowledge-based economy and understand that they need to educate their own and they need to develop their own ecosystem as well. And I think the UAE's done that very well. Saudi's done very, very well. Qatar's doing it now as well.
Beau, do you want to add anything on that point?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I try and think about it is, after spending so much time in South and Southeast Asia and watching the natural capital flows and flows of talent, meaning human capital, and people building things, and kind of more familiar with what's around them. Think about it in the same way here in the region. It's, the Middle East is at the center of, the flow of people, products, cultures from South Asia all the way in through Africa. And so this, what we tend to call the South Asia, Middle East, East Africa corridor is a very real thing. And it's not just founders looking to move into other markets, which that's happening. I mean, there are Pakistani founders who've built companies who've moved into Saudi Arabia. You've seen Saudi founders move into other markets. You've seen the UAE, because it is a hub market as opposed to a destination market when it comes to size of population and size of economy. That's always happened. But you're starting to see capital flows of, and talent, from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Middle East, all across the region. So, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and then all the way in through East Africa, and, coming in through the region as a starting point, not only through Egypt, but also just across the waterways of people being very involved in the way that the economies function. And, the investors here know those markets very well. So they're willing to invest, both towards the West, meaning into Africa, but then also towards the East into South Asia. And so, and then there's strong economic, there's strong economic and cultural ties that flow between the Middle East and countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. And so, it's a very exciting time. Like, things are happening. It's not simple. It's not like just because you start a company in one of these markets and you think that there is a strong potential overlap in another market that you're going to win, because we're starting to see similar companies pop up in every single market. So you have to be very strategic. So entrepreneurs are moving into the markets that they think they can win with strategic partners on the investment side and on the advisory side who can help them with those unique advantages, and vice versa. But the interesting thing about here is none of the individual markets, except maybe for Saudi Arabia, due to its high per capita GDP, can actually, even though there's a large amount of low-income people in Saudi Arabia, which is a strong focus of the government and also of a lot of impact-driven entrepreneurs, is how you do things like financial inclusion there. But all across the region, people are trying to build solutions that tend to have a strong starting point in every other market. The question is who can get there fast enough, who has the right capital backers. It's the same game we see everywhere. And for me, it's just very exciting. This kind of this natural flow of people, capital, and ideas from the South Asia through the Middle East into East Africa, natural, and I would say historic economic corridor is very real. And you can see institutional players putting money to work there, not only on the venture side, but also on the later stage side.
That's very interesting. Beau, have you seen any policies that the government has rolled out to support this ecosystem in the past couple of years? And has there been a shift in perspective in the regulatory environment?
I can talk a little bit. I just see capital flowing. Sonia would know much better on the regulatory side. I haven't been here that long. And so she's been able to see any of those changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, there's a lot of bilateral ties being formed. I think it's evident to kind of the lay people, the laymen and laywomen, when you see the Korean president show up at FII in Saudi, or you see the Saudi delegations going to Korea or to other markets in Asia, and vice versa. We see Singaporean delegations coming in and vice versa. So I think there's those bilateral ties kind of at the governmental level, but also at the ecosystem level happening as well. I've met with a lot of entrepreneurs that have come with their governments from their respective countries to the UAE or to Saudi to meet and get a feel for the ecosystem here in the MENA region. At the same time, I know a lot of founders from this region who've also been with their own governments to other markets to also explore. So I think that's happening for sure. I think from a regulatory standpoint, obviously, ADGM, for example, in Abu Dhabi has set itself up to attract a lot of foreign fund managers who have now set up in the region as well. So this has been work in progress. I think we were one of the first ones to get the VC license in the region, but since we got ours, a lot more have, and they're creating that that ecosystem, not Abu Dhabi and Dubai both, but I'm just giving Abu Dhabi as an example. They have created kind of this ecosystem through Hub 71, the various initiatives that they have in Abu Dhabi to actually create a physical space for people to actually move themselves, their families, their businesses to the region. Definitely seeing an upflow of footfall, I would say. Beau and I were just in Abu Dhabi again this week, and we're constantly bumping into people from other markets. It is feeling very alive, I would say. This region is feeling very alive, whether you be in Saudi, whether you be in the UAE or even Qatar. Like, you know, you're bumping into people that you wouldn't necessarily have thought that you'd be bumping into. And people are taking this region very, very seriously and considering moving you know, their either their funds or their families to the region. So I think they're doing it right. I think from a regulatory standpoint, you know, it's always a work in progress, but they've iterated very fast in order to be able to attract people from different markets. And then they've created these different task forces as well, whether it be ESG task forces, etc. Right? So they're learning. Like, I think I think a lot of people think, oh, like, you know, and I used to say this even, like, we're a bit behind in this region when it comes to impact and ESG, etc. But the one thing the region does very well is push on the accelerator pedal. So even if we're behind, we will accelerate very, 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 very quickly and catch up. And I think that's something that the region does very well.
Yeah, one thing I'll add, as Sonia was talking, she reminded me of one thing from a regulatory standpoint. This may seem very simple, but especially in the UAE, a lot of the former foreign ownership restrictions or required local ownership restrictions, like you had to start a company with a local, have all gone away. And, you know, I would say especially the UAE is very open. Like, it's a country that's essentially powered by very long-term thinking and strategic thinkers of local Emiratis who know the market well, know their government well, know the economies well, and know what they want to accomplish. But there's a large number, you know, this country is like over 85%, you know, expats. It's very different than any of the other markets in Asia, right? So essentially there's this very strong sense of openness that exists here, and investing in people from kind of all walks of life and from all over the world. Like, if you go to a founder event in the UAE, and it's similar in other markets as well, but it's very real that it's just a cross section of the entire world. It's quite exciting, you know, and I think that you're starting to see, maybe not so much on the regulatory side, but on the policy side, you're seeing money put to work. You're seeing programs being launched. You're seeing, you know, tie-ups. Like, I believe that a lot of the governments in the region were very involved with the Indonesian setup of the Indonesian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So from a policy perspective, also, it's very flexible because you have such long-term strategic thinking leaders who want to transform their economies, want to transform industries. And because the countries aren't so large and the bureaucracy that typically comes with larger countries is not here, they can turn the ship faster. It doesn't turn on, you know, it's not like it turns on an absolute dime, as we like to say, but it turns a lot faster if once there can be proof and, you know, clear thinking about what's going to benefit the long-term trajectory of each of the countries here. And different countries are in different places in that development cycle as well.
That's very true. I think it was our first experience in Abu Dhabi last month, but I could feel the welcoming nature of the region. And I've personally heard 2 to 3 people who've shifted full-time, shifted their funds, focus areas into the geography. So it was very interesting to see that. For this next question, there's a lot of buzz around innovative finance mechanisms and blended finance. Are these approaches gaining traction in the region now, or do you see them becoming more prominent further down the road?
I don't think we're quite there yet. You have the DFIs who are obviously in market, like the IFCs, etc., right? I think more could be done on educating the market around blended finance products. I mean, we have venture debt funds that have popped up, and that will continue to pop up. So I think that's an area that's interesting. But but I still think we're at the beginning. We're at the beginning of our journey. I think there's a lot more that could be done. I think there's still a bifurcation between kind of the private sector and philanthropy. You know, and we can get into AVPN afterwards, but I think that's something that needs to be kind of brought together, because ultimately my view is that we're all part of the same value chain. And so, you know, it's very likely that an entrepreneur who's building a product might be too early to pitch to us, but maybe they'll go to the philanthropist and get that initial round of funding from that philanthropist plus friends and family in order to build the product out, get some traction, and then be ready to pitch to us. So I think like there's still some work to be done on the capital stack, and I include the philanthropist as part of that capital stack. So, but I'm hopeful. Like I think it will be done. I think at COP, there's a big forum that was organized by Badr Jaffer and his team that brought together some amazing philanthropists. But I would like to see more consolidation. Like I would like to approach this as more of a coalition of like-minded people, rather than those are the philanthropists and those are the VCs and those are the growth stage investors. And, you know, I think we're all in this together. None of this works if the capital stack is broken at any point in that value chain, right?
Maybe one thing I'll add is, you know, there's a history of doing creative financing here in the region, and very, very sophisticated people at the sovereign wealth funds in the region who've looked at everything, right? So there's a deep understanding of all the tools. The question will be how will they be used going forward? And I think we are at the beginning on what I would say the traditional approach towards blended finance, but there are other approaches due to a lot of the underpinnings of Islamic finance, which look at it differently than a lot of the traditional tools that are used in the West. So that is one thing that I think is an additional tool in the toolbox to be able to support companies, support entrepreneurs, support development in a different way, using finance and using capital. And then also there are some very large projects underway, which are not quite public, that are focused on actually spreading innovation across the markets and transforming industries. And so I think this year will be an exciting year where you'll start to see some big announcements and some things that are being done to really do things in a different way and just think about it in a different way due to kind of the reach and the flow of people that come here. It's a really nice jumping point. And, you know, sometimes it may make it sound like I'm trying to, you know, sell people, but, you know, I had a very big eye-opening experience when I moved to the region, just to understand the philosophical underpinnings and kind of the long-term objectives and goals, which are just so strong. You know, I remember being in Indonesia in the mid 2010s and even through now. And when that change in this pulse towards nation building became very real, I mean, honestly, it was like everybody I met, you know, the founders we invested into, you know, so like Aldi, who built our company Ruma and then went on to run GoPay and now is just, you know, super involved with, you know, so many different founders. Like that idea that everything that these folks did really mattered became real. And that sort of pulse and energy is here as well, because people know that we're on the brink of a, you know, and AI is accelerating the feelings that everybody needs to be prepared for a new future again. But ever since I've been here, that sort of belief, that sort of hunger, that sort of need to try and think in a different way and build in a different way has been here. And I think that there'll be some exciting things that come out this year.
Totally agree. There needs to be a seamless flow of capital across the continuum of capital, and glad to know the efforts that are being made and also scaling up. I think lastly, reflecting on your participation at the AVPN conference last month in Abu Dhabi, I am curious to know what your experience was like, and also what were your expectations going into it and were they met? And also, both of you are part of many impact networks. What do you see the role of these networks playing to drive more investments into the region?
I can go first. Both Lola and I, my colleague Lola, who attended as well, we really enjoyed the conference. And the main reason being that we're so used to having to justify why we're doing what we're doing. and having to explain that, no, this is not us investing in social enterprises. Yes, we look for financial returns. Like, like we're so used to having to do that, like almost like justify our existence. That was refreshing to be in an environment where you didn't have to do that. Like people kind of, I guess, drink the same Kool-Aid, understand the space, and we could just cut straight through the chase, basically, to what we're doing, as opposed to having to go into this kind of long half-hour thing of like, oh, but this is not philanthropy, and no, this is not a social enterprise. And so I thought that we found that really, really refreshing, is that we felt like we were surrounded by like-minded individuals. That's point one. The second point I would say is really amazing for us to be able to interact with people from Asia. Because you tend to go to the conferences in this region and you tend to see the same people all the time. And this was like a whole new set of people for us. And so a lot of kind of new relationships formed with people that we didn't even know about, to be honest. And I think that was really also refreshing, was actually kind of being able to interact and discuss topics and find similarities in maybe some of the challenges that we're facing, or some of the opportunities that we see across our markets. Those 2 points, I would say, are very, very important. And I would like to see more of that. Again, back to Beau's earlier point and my earlier point of this kind of new digital Silk Road that's being formed, these new corridors being formed from Asia through MENA and Africa. Like, I would like to see more of that. Like, how do we bring people in the room, like just like you did, but just add the Africa layer to that, from these markets, because I think there's a lot of knowledge transfer that's very important to have, and then there's a lot of synergies and partnership opportunities across these vast regions. And if AVPN can serve a role in facilitating that, that would be amazing. So I would say that it was a very kind of unique experience for us. From an expectation standpoint, I think you exceeded our expectations. I also didn't expect there to be that many people. But it was amazing to see people from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Korea, it wasn't just the Singapore group, it was really kind of, you did a great job at capturing like a lot of important markets. Indonesia, of course, with people like Dondi, and Vietnam with Trien. So, it was a great group of people across Asia that actually landed in Abu Dhabi. It was a bit surreal. And so for us, it was amazing.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit to add is, I always hoped it would happen. Also being very, very familiar with the entire journey of the AVPN team and, the passion of the team, and then to see what's been built, over the last decade has been phenomenal. And it's really a testament to, how everything has come together, and how the hard work, energy that the team has put in has really brought people to a different place and changed the conversations, which is incredibly exciting. And then bringing that here to Abu Dhabi was actually phenomenal. And the thing that actually blew me away was the fact that, the level of government support and excitement and involvement from Abu Dhabi was incredible. Right? Like I have rarely seen in a short period of time of someone getting, a group of people getting familiar with something, making it happen, and doing it at the scale at which it happened. And so for me, I've only been here 3.5 years now, but there were so many people that I met who are actually doing work here in the region who I haven't even had a chance to meet, even within the UAE, which have led to a set of, additional follow-on conversations, meeting Kish, who runs a big part of the portfolio at Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And I didn't know they had an office in Abu Dhabi, and I didn't know how active they were, so there's a lot of great people. And then within the Abu Dhabi government, I've already had multiple meetings since the AVPN conference with people who are really trying to push things forward. And I don't know when I would have met them if it wouldn't have been for the conference, because it's not like there's a, like we've seen grow up in some other markets, there's not like this like impact cohort beyond what sets of people Sonia has kind of been able to assemble over the last few years, and holding these parties in her garden and bringing speakers together. She's done an incredible job on that, but this was a different set of people coming together in a different way that typically, would be hard to find and identify and work with. And so I feel very, very positive. I am hoping that, as the conference continues to pop between different regions, and then you'll start to see, most likely, just based on, like we said a little bit earlier, the natural flows of people, of where they tend to do more of their work. You'll probably see a lot more on of folks from South Asia coming to the UAE for the conferences, or Saudi, because they just do more business. So you'll start to see that it'll be a little bit heavier on this way, and then but everybody's very interested and they want to learn from one another. And I think that that's one of the things that's great about the folks here, is they're saying, hey, listen, there's a lot of people who've been doing this for a long time. Let's actually just find the best and let's talk with them, and let's try and learn what we can. And they do a great job of not just adopting things wholesale, but saying, hey, how does this apply to our market? In the same way that the UAE government learned a tremendous amount from the Singaporean government years and years and years ago, but then adapted it and did it in their own way. And I think that we're just starting to see that play out in the impact space now.
Thank you, both of you, for sharing such incredible feedback on the conference. And it's really motivating for us at AVPN as we continue our mission to mobilize capital towards impact. And now, as we wrap up, I'd love to hear your closing thoughts and what are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think that it's an exciting time. I think the flows of private capital to drive this type of change are more important than ever and more sophisticated than ever. And it's really going to just be right sizing it and finding the right solutions, and working together with people who can add value. And I think that the one thing about what AVPN's work is how do we continue to build those bridges between folks, because there are so many natural, economic, and social and cultural and political connections all across Asia, including the Middle East. And if we can accelerate those partnerships, which everybody's doing an incredible job on their own, by the way, like Sonia said, there's so much bilateral work going on between West Asia and Southeast Asia and East Asia, that it's incredible. And I think that AVPN can really be a part of facilitating, the really smart, good folks who are trying to drive that forward.
Where's the next AVPN conference happening in the region?
We will let you know as soon as we know. Thank you so much, Beau and Sonia, for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you on our podcast.
Thank you for having us.